Today on Co-op for Two, a quick before you buy video for Legacy of Dragonholt. What is it and is it for you? Let's start with a quick overview of the game and how to play. Legacy of Dragonholt is essentially a deluxe choose-your-own-adventure storybook in an epic campaign format. It supports 1 to 6 players playing cooperatively, but is essentially a solo game, and the smaller the player count, the better. It's a one-and-done, multi-session campaign lasting 10 or more hours, played over 8 to 12 sessions, lasting about an hour each. It has a recommended target age of 14 plus. Most of the game is suitable for children of any age, but there are occasional scenes of violence and death that may be upsetting to some small children. It was designed by Nikki Valens for Fantasy Flight Games and published in 2017. Players are encouraged to role-play the game and start the campaign by creating characters, which include choosing a race, elf, human, orc, catfolk, dwarf, or gnome, a class, bard, brawler, knight, sage, thief, etc., and 5 to 8 skills from a list of 24 or so, which must overlap your race and class abilities, and which also determine your maximum stamina health points. Gameplay consists of reading a section of text from one of 6 booklets and then choosing from a multiple-choice list of actions to take next. Based on the chosen action, the player party will be directed to the next section of text to read. Some options are only available when the active player has a certain skill, and some outcomes will depend on whether players collectively have a specific non-exhausted skill available. Players always travel together and make decisions together, but for each paragraph, one player must be chosen as the active player, flipping their activation token to the used side. Activation tokens ensure that each player takes a turn at making final decisions and utilizing their skill set. Only when all players have taken a turn being the active player may they flip their activation tokens to refresh their skills. Solo players do not use the activation token mechanic. Each player has stamina health points that may become depleted during combat and exertion. There is no player death in the game, but when a player loses all stamina points, they must begin disabling their skills, reducing their options. The player party may also acquire gold during the course of the adventure and use that gold to purchase items for use or acquire experience points which can be used to add additional skills. The campaign is structured around the village of Dragonholt and the large village book of paragraphs, where you will spend most of your time. You will spend 7 days there, 7 game sessions. The village sessions are somewhat open-ended in that you may choose which areas of the village to visit from a map in any arbitrary order. Certain choices will cause time to pass, and each day session will end after a certain number of turns have passed. Many choices made in the Village book affect the narrative side stories experienced by the players, stories that may not affect the outcome of the campaign, but provide an emotional connection or even a romantic encounter with the non-player characters in the world of Dragonholt. But at certain points, and by choosing certain options, the players may trigger a quest in one of the 5 auxiliary quest booklets. These are standalone mini-adventures, which are combat-heavy and generally quite linear. These quests typically end in some degree of clear success or failure. During the game, the players will frequently be instructed to mark down that a particular story point has been triggered. Throughout the text sections in the game, players will be instructed to branch and read alternate paragraphs based on whether or not certain story points have been triggered. In this way, the game keeps track of certain choices, achievements, and events that the players have experienced, and they will affect future story consequences and options, giving the feel of a living, breathing world that is changing over time. At the end of the campaign, the story wraps up, and the players will experience one of several different endings to the story, depending on how well the players accomplished their main objectives. Almost all of your time playing Legacy of Dragonholt is going to be spent reading. So in the end, it's going to come down to whether the story works for you. It reads like a young adult fiction book. It's progressive, inclusive, sort of a simplistic fairy tale. Sometimes reads as ham-handed, overly reliant on visual descriptions and some occasional adolescent humor. There are some game mechanics. There's a whole skill check system. There's health points, there's an upgrade path for skills, and there are items you can buy. And these do give it more flavor of a role-playing game. And there's no randomness. However, there's also no real strategy, planning, or deduction. Most of the choices you make, they'll be hard to justify them based on any kind of logic. You're just sort of going with your gut or role-playing your character. And the choices you make can lead to a branching narrative that changes quite a bit depending on what you do. However, I would say the biggest miss of the game is that those choices are very rarely moral or psychological. They're almost all choices that there'd be no way to predict what's going to happen. Often in combat, there are choices you make that are going to be hard to predict, or they're going to be obvious because one of them relies on a rare skill that you happen to have, and so you would almost always take that. And then the other area that you've got some choices are, you can make choices that govern which non-player characters you will be talking with or interacting or romancing. And again, I would say the game leans much more heavily on that mechanic. So who is this game for? I'd say it's primarily for people who love choose-your-own-adventure storybook games, but maybe are looking for something a little more epic. Now, I will say that you have to be prepared for maybe less humor than you would get in a choose-your-own-adventure storybook, less excitement, less chaos, and much slower burn and consequences of a decision lasting for 12 hours. If you're a fan of the detective narrative style games like Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, Vienna Connection, Detective, Mythos Tales, etc., you are not going to be satisfied by this game. There's no real deduction or mystery solving, and very little point in trying to spend time figuring things out before they happen. If you're gender non-conforming and put a high value on seeing a positive representation of yourself in a game, then this game may have some real appeal to you, especially if you like the fantasy world setting and sort of a simple fairy tale and focus on interpersonal relationships and romances. It may also appeal to those who are just interested in a long campaign, sort of a light role-playing game with very minimal game mechanics. Although you do need to be prepared for the possibility of spending 14 or more hours in a campaign and getting a very negative, sad ending due to no real fault of your own. But it is an interesting and unique game. And that's Legacy of Dragonholt.